Hey, it's Michael, and this is the Kintsugi Podcast. I'll be back in a minute with this week's conversation about resilience. But first, if you wish to create a better life and have a better career, then please visit michaelobrienshift.com and download your free workbook on how to create a better life. In it, you'll discover ways to find more energy for the things and the people who matter most to you, so you can create a better tomorrow. Hey, there's Michael, and welcome back, or welcome to the Kintsugi Podcast. It's time for another conversation about resilience, and today we have a special guest. I first met our guest back in February or March of this year on Clubhouse, which I've shared. And as soon as I heard his voice and what he shared, I knew we had to meet. It was almost like he was a brother from another mother. I just loved his energy, a sense of realism, but calm, and beautiful perspectives on development. And I could go through his whole resume. He's worked with Tony Robbins and others. Today, he's a business advisor to high-end businesses. He's also a new author, and I wanted to have him come on to the Kintsugi Podcast to introduce him to you. He recently released The Kid and the King, a beautiful read that I highly recommend. In it, he walks through the emotional mastery process. What do we do in our moments? You often have heard me talk about not letting a bad moment turn into a bad day. Well, Shasheen has that process for that. What happens in these moments? Because things are going to happen to us. We're going to fall down in that Kintsugi spirit. The question is, when we get up, how do we get up? Where do we go next? I know you're going to love his energy and just his take on personal development today. So without further ado, I invite you to grab a piece of paper, a pen to write on, to take some notes, to write down all the gems he shares, maybe grab something to drink, coffee or tea, whatever it may be, and sit back and listen to our conversation about resilience with Shasheen Shah, the author of The Kid and the King. Hey everyone, we have a special guest with us today. One of my friends, one of my peeps. So I met Shasheen Shah back in the beginning of 2021, and we kicked it off. It was almost like we were brothers from, different mothers, if you will. And I just love his spirit. We've been able to do some work since that moment in time, share some philosophies. He recently just published an amazing book that we'll dive into, and we'll talk about resilience and coherence and really doing the inner work. So I am psyched for this conversation. So Sash, welcome to the Kintsugi Podcast. It's time for another conversation about resilience, and you are the perfect guest to talk about resilience. So welcome. Good morning.
I love it, Michael. Good morning.
So we're going to start here, as we do with all of our guests. How would you define resilience?
So resilience to me, I guess it would just be the ability to, when something feels off or off center from where you're wanting to go, the ability to bounce back elegantly. And I think maybe that's the word for me. There's the work that I think where I'm moving towards, and I think the work that you and I are both looking at is how do we do that elegantly? How do we do that with the least amount of effort, with the least amount of fight? Ups and downs happen, right? The yin and the yang, there's highs and lows, but our ability to elegantly navigate that, to kind of course correct along the way, I think is the most important part of it for me.
Yeah, I love the word elegance. It brings up grace. How do we gracefully walk through life?
Yes.
And be fully in our moment. So, because moments are going to happen, as you just mentioned, we're going to get knocked down. If we play in traffic, living a truly meaningful life, we're going to get knocked down. So how do we go through these moments with some grace? So now we have that foundation of resilience set. Can you share a little bit more about your background with the audience?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to think what would be interesting and relevant to this conversation. I would, there's the bio stuff that you can read about, so I won't talk about that. But I think what's brought me to this place and into this field and into this work has been, a circumstance, a life circumstance, I think, like, that we all have. And my particular story is growing up the way I did in the suburbs of New York as a Indian immigrant's kid, and, trying to just navigate life. And, the feeling from the beginning that when I was younger, I just didn't fit in. I wasn't a part of, it was like waiting for Scotty to beam me back up to the planet I belonged on because I just didn't seem to get it. At least it felt that way. And, that kind of initial, feeling, I think, had, if I go back in time, I can really just chart the course of how that guided me in looking for, seeking out the quote unquote answer. I've heard someone say, the day that they were handing out the instruction book in life, I must have been absent that day. And I think that, my journey has been one of, immense curiosity and almost in some ways, kind of a desperate life-saving, reach to, how do I do this? How do I deal with being human? And that led me down this path of personal development, self-discovery, and today, serve as a trusted advisor for, executives that are trying to navigate the world of business and the personal world.
I love it. Yeah, no, that sense of belonging. The more times I travel around the sun, as I get older, that whole feeling, like so many of us didn't have that sense of belonging. Well, regardless of our backgrounds and where we come from, and for some it's more intense than others, but I do think we thirst for that. And after going through what we've gone through now for the last 19, 20 months, that sense of belonging, I think we're even thirstier for it, to feel like we're included in something.
100%.
And how do we go forward together? I think some of the isolation, I think for some has been good, but I think ultimately, like, we need to feel like we have belonging, have a sense of purpose, that it's grounding, like roots of a really beautiful oak tree. Like we need that. I think we need that even more so as we go forward. So I just love what you shared. I felt it too when I was younger. It's more about, I felt like I belonged in sports, but outside of sports, I didn't feel like I belonged, and I didn't feel heard or seen. And I think we go through like some variation of that, like not being heard, not being seen, not being loved, not feeling like we belong. And that, well, we go through experiences that lays down some scars. It's part of our kintsugi. And then as we grow older, hopefully with a little bit more wisdom, we can start to see ourselves a little bit differently. So, it's the magic in growing older and the wisdom that we get.
It's 100%. And I think that, I feel so privileged to have evolved into this career in which I do have an opportunity on a day-to-day basis to listen to, some of the most successful people, arguably some of the most interesting people, and who have, achieved and have, run up the flagpole and rang the bell. And it doesn't shock me anymore, but I think that it's so important for me to just recognize that with that window into the world, how much reassurance there is that there's nothing wrong here with me and my thoughts. I mean, you get that, a lot of the clients that I'll talk to come from two schools. Either they were trying to be good boys and good girls, they were really dutiful, and, that's how they won the game of life. And all they wanted to do was be seen and heard by their parents and society, and they became fine young men, and they could nod their head in the right places, shake their hand, and look people in the eye with a smile on their face and pull their shoulders back and do those things. And there was that school that wanted to be seen. And then there was the other school that was like the rebels that, like, they were like the downtrodden, or, when someone told them they couldn't do it, or came from some background, or their parents were a particular way. And, they came through the world of like, I'll show you. And that also created, this being seen, and they're successful by, most standards of material wealth and accolades and titles. And yet, I don't know, when I feel like they end up in my world, there's something that's missing in there. There is a fuel that's run out. They've been going so hard, and I think it's like the strategy has an expiration date. And so in the context of resilience, their ability to kind of tap back into that fuel is gone. It's like they got given a hammer, right, in life at a young kid, and they got this hammer, and all they do is they run around hammering, and they're really good at it. I mean, they can whack that hammer. They can cut a 2x4 with a hammer if they whack it the right way and put it in a vise, and and they can bang it down and make it really smooth. And it's a lot of work, and it's not very elegant at times, right? Like, wow, if you just took a table saw, you could have cut that super easily. But you've got a hammer, and you're really good with that hammer. I like that hammer of yours. I think that's where you end up seeing some of the challenges.
I agree. It goes back to that old saying, like if the only tool you have is a hammer, you see everything as a nail, right? And
That's
so
right.
after a while, you can get, I think folks have and continue to get to very high places on that success ladder, if you will, depending on how you define success, right? So I think both you and I define success a little bit differently than we did when we were 25.
That's right.
But a lot of people, like in a traditional definition of success, climb the corporate ladder, if you will, or the entrepreneurial ladder, have followers, have influence, have stuff, right? The hammer works for a while, maybe even half your life. And then you get to, I think, a certain age and the hammer loses its effectiveness, because to your point, I think we're out of fuel. What do we do then? And that's where we come into the inner work. Now, before we hit record here, so we talked about coherence, and I want to bring that concept up, because it ties to your company's name. And so when you think of coherence vis-a-vis resilience and like this moment in time, what comes up for you, Sash?
It's so interesting to me because, I really hit my stride in the last couple of years. And, I named my company Coherent Strategies almost 20 years ago when I read HeartMath's book, From Chaos to Coherence. I thought there was something really compelling about this idea of, taking fractal light and honing it down into a laser and how effective you can be. I could arguably say that my life the company could have been called Incoherent Strategies because I tried not doing a lot of things or doing things the opposite way or doing things the hard way. And again, because I had a hammer, right? I was the rebel. I could do things my way. I didn't have to follow the rules. And, that, and I think it's important to mention that it does work to a certain degree. But if we start talking about elegance and wisdom and both you and I are over 50 now, and so for me, the idea of, you're a cyclist. I mean, you probably heard this analogy, but an ability of a bike wheel, for example, to ride on a flat road, if you've got a couple of spokes out of whack, I mean, you're fine. I mean, you can ride that ride, no problem. Not a problem at all, right? I mean, you can have them all out of whack. The bike can be out of tune, but you'll have a decent ride. I mean, you can enjoy the scenery, cruise along, and you're not going to worry about it a whole lot. But the moment you hit a stone or a bump in the road with your spokes out of whack, your ability to withstand that shock is completely mitigated by the fact that if those spokes are out of whack. So if you're out of alignment, if things are out of whack, when you hit that bump in the road, the likelihood is that wheel will bend and it will become a really, really bumpy ride. And so the idea of coherence, and we've seen the wheel of life and looking at all the different areas of your life, and is just bringing just a level of integrity into all of the areas of your life. And now when I say that, I think that's the work in life, is that we're constantly looking at how do I live my life in coherence? How do I create some balance around myself so that I'm not trading my workout schedule for getting work done, or I'm not trading getting work done for managing my finances, or I'm managing my finances but not doing the work to go earn money. Or there's this whole notion in business of everything's got a trade-off. You do one, there's going to be less of this, and it's a zero-sum game. And so I think the artistry that I continue to keep, kind of reveling in and playing with is, how do I, what's the life, what does life look like for me? And, how's the EQ settings on my life optimal where I'm really feeling in resonance with me, right? No one wants to really wake up in the morning and hike up to the top of the mountain at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was 35 degrees. It's inconvenient and cold. But for me, that's part of my, that's on my EQ list. That's some of the stuff that works for me. So I think that's what it is. And so I feel like when that all feels good, when things are kind of singing and humming along, as life presents challenges, as life presents things, my ability to kind of center, to ground, to observe, interpret, look at, see the situation for what it is rather than an extraordinary dramatic story that I could tend to make up about things, that's all really directly related to like how coherently am I living my life today?
I love that. And thanks for throwing in a little cycling analogy. So I'm going to pull that cycling analogy thread just a little bit further. So
let's go.
When you're riding your bike, and let's just say we'll go to resilience, you fall down, right? The question that a cyclist will ask first to those around him or her, if there are people around him or her, is, how's my bike? That was the question I asked the EMTs when I got hit, right? How's my bike? That's a little bit of a jokey thing, but
right.
For a cyclist, it's a serious thing, like, how's my bike? And our ability to get back up sort of depends on the alignment of the bike and the alignment of ourselves.
That's right.
So when we crash, because if we're going to ride in traffic, we're going to crash. If we're going to live in traffic, we'll have moments. If the bike is damaged in some way, you may be able to get it up, but you can't keep pedaling forward. Or if we break something, we're out of alignment. So this whole concept of alignment, I think, is so key. And in this spirit too, like pulling on again what you said, Sash, is that when you have a few spokes out of alignment, it puts stress on all the other spokes.
Yes.
And so you might be killing it with your career, but if your personal life is a mess, well, that mess, if you want to label it as such, is pulling on your career. Like if you can get things into harmony or balance, then all aspects of your life work better.
That's right.
And that requires a lot of inner work, So I love that concept. So I want to get to the book.
Yeah.
Because I love the book, The Kid and the King. So, and we've talked through it, and I want to bring it to life for the listeners. But I want to start here. Why write it now? And it seems like everyone has a book. And so for some, aspiring authors, it's like, oh gosh, are there too many books out there? So I'm not sure if you wrestled with that, but what was the spark? What was the genesis of you writing this book at this point in your life?
It's a great question to answer, right? Because there's some story back behind that. About 10 or 15 years ago, it was like, oh, Shasheen, you got to get a blog. Oh, you have to get a podcast going. If you're going to be a coach, you're going to have to get an audience. You're going to have to do all these. And at that time, there was this push of getting a book. And you can write a book in 30 days. There was all this stuff that was going out around then. And it still is it's the same degree. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, none of that was in resonance with me at that time. I was like, I hadn't really codified anything that I thought that was valuable enough that would, be a book. I had read a lot of books. I've read a lot of bad books. I've read a lot of, colleagues of mine's books that, and I heard everything from like, oh, just write it. It's like, it's a business card. It'll give you credibility. It'll do this for you. It'll do that for you. And I was like, well, what about writing a book that will actually do something for the person that's reading it, right? Not about me. And I, in the dedication of the book, oh God, I had it right here. I said, I was like, who am I going to dedicate this book to? And I said, to you, the reader, for the curiosity that has brought you to this place on your journey. May the concepts and ideas put forth in the following chapters light up a path that brings you more love, compassion, joy, gratitude, and adventure. And that's why I wrote the book. A mentor of mine said, whatever you do, don't be a hack, Shasheen. Don't throw anything out there that you're not really proud of. And it took me 6 years to get here. And it took a lot of tearing myself apart and putting myself back together again to actually get this final version done. I rewrote the whole thing. I tore up the manuscript during COVID, and I just said, this isn't me. This isn't reflective of the work that I want to put out there. I don't think that this is actually of any benefit to the reader the way it's written. And a guy by the name of Robert Stover, who really helped me organize my thoughts in a more coherent way, he said, I'm going to be the advocate for your reader in this process. And we're going to get down to the essence of what you've been teaching and doing for all these years so it can be communicable. And that's what I did. And that's why I wrote the book, because I think it's so important in this time.
I love it. I love it. I want to start with how you open the book and ask you to comment on it. So in the introduction, you start with, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing to fix. Nothing is broken. Yet you experience an inner struggle. Why? So in today's age, those first lines, and you can tell a good book by the first couple of lines. I struggled before my accident, and this was before social media, that like I wasn't complete, right? I had to do more to be more. And now you add in social media, and we now know that Facebook and Instagram, they know how harmful and toxic Instagram is to teenage girls, and the whole concept of FOMO or comparisonitis or any other phrase that's
imposter
not healthy.
Syndrome also.
Yeah, it's sort of set up that we're all, and you and I are both on social media. We share the highlight reels of our lives. And it can add to the fire that you're just not enough, right? There's something that needs to be fixed. You're not complete yet. And you even mention it as like the reason to write the book. There are a whole bunch of people saying, you're not really a complete coach yet. You need to fix all this stuff, Sash. You need a blog and a podcast and all that.
That's right.
And that was, going back a few years, and it's grown bigger, I think, with even more juice, now in 2021. So, just your thoughts there is just like, as you wrote that, like, I'm totally with you, but then how do we navigate like that belief in a world that sort of seems to be set up with messages that are communicating that you do need to be fixed. You're just not enough yet.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I opened up the book is because, the industry that, the personal development industry, I mean, I think there's just this, we're constantly, I think we're just being lied to. I think the big lie is that you're broken and that you need this. And I think we're just as a culture, I think the marketing guys have got us, right? We live in a world that's driven by an advertising media that basically says, you need this, there's this focus on external solutions, external manifestations that will somehow lead us to believe that we're going to feel better, look better, and all of those different things. And I think that the approach that a lot of the teachers that are out there are teaching, a lot of the self-help industry are utilizing, is this approach of, it's a very masculine, fix it, crush it, beat it,
Slay
conquer it, all of that, right? Like it's that kind of thing. And what's so delicate about that is that that's effective, right? I mean, if you're, on the streets and if you're in a hole, deep in a hole, you're going to have to use, let's call it the hammer, and really, really fight. You're going to need to walk over those coals or, run to the top, whatever that might, you may need to harness that part of you to accomplish that almost survival situation, if you will. And I think it's appropriate in those situations. But, if you're going to come to the table with a business challenge, or maybe it's a weight challenge or a health challenge, and what you're trying to do is subjugate this part of you, the insecurity, that wanting to belong, the wanting to be seen, the insecurity, and try to squash it down and push it down. What I've seen over time is that while that may be effective, and that's the thing I want people to hear, it works. It'll get you that car. It will get you to be the number one in your field. It can get you the new job, the new title. It can get you a successful launch in your media campaign. It can get you more clients. But at this stage of life for me, and you, I know too, And my clients' lives, they've done that. And the experience that they have after doing those things is typically suboptimal. It looks great. The reels are great. The resumes are great. The LinkedIn profiles are great. But I've never felt as good as my life looked until I started taking on that inner coherence, started doing the deeper work, asking like 3 hard questions that I think are underestimated how difficult they are to answer honestly. Like, what do you want? Why do you want it? And what are you willing to do to get it? And I think that to me is really what this is about. And so the idea that there's nothing wrong with you is this idea that instead of fighting with that side of you, and instead of having an adversarial relationship with yourself where you need to do punitive disciplinary measures or punitive accountability measures and all of those things, which again, I will say it again, they all are effective to some degree. But if we're playing the long game, learning to meet that side of you with some love, with some compassion, with maybe a new paradigm, a new framework to operate in, and being like, oh, you know what? I'm about to try something new. You know what's predictable? I'm going to procrastinate. I'm going to delay. I'm going to probably be disorganized. I'm going to probably make excuses. I'm going to probably think it's not a good idea. My brain is just going to, and instead of trying to shut it up, crush it, squash it, to be like, oh no, I hear you. Of course you feel that way. Think about all the things that you went through in which you were embarrassed, hurt, whatever that might be. Sure, okay. Okay, now that we've got that's what's there, how do we create with that simultaneously existing without having to shut it up? And I think that, to me, is one of the core essences of messages of the book that I don't think is being spoken loudly enough. I think it's intellectual for most people, but most people will just be like, fuck it.
Yeah, it's good.
Just, that's it. I'm done. I'm gonna crush this now. And that's what I think goes on.
Yeah, I think it goes on a lot. I think that aspect of personal development, self-help, however you want to phrase it, there is a rocket fuel type of feeling with it that works.
Yes.
Like you can take the course, you can get hyped up, you can get jacked up, you go to the seminar, and then 3 days later, the fuel burns off.
There you go. Yep.
And there's nothing left. So it's like a drug. Like, so what do? Well, we take another course.
That's right.
And I think the pray, and I'll use pray in this, because a lot of the gurus of self-help portray themselves as the lion, right? Some of them have icons. So it's like, I'm the lion, I'm the king of the jungle. And so if they're the lion, then the other, like the antelopes, are all the coaches out there, all the people that want to break into personal growth. There's another course to sell, right? So it's another dopamine hit, or another hit. Like, wow, I went through that course and that felt great, and then 3 days later the fuel runs out. So then you got to take another course or go to another seminar, and you just keep on chasing it and feeding the addiction, and it's all transactional. It doesn't last. It's not the long game. And what you talk about in The Kid and the King is the long game. Like, why are you here? What do you wish to do, and why do you wish to do it? And then how do you get to a sense of emotional mastery? And I want to talk next about those questions. Like, I hope you can share those with the audience. But like, I think the self-help industry, which we spend billions on and we're in it.
Yeah.
I think too much of the industry preys on people. And it's the Lamborghinis, Lear jets, you can be this way. And this chase of a whole bunch of people looking to be included, a sense of belonging, because they just don't feel like they're enough yet on their own. So I think,
and you're bringing up that what they're putting out there, which is the external manifestations of a life that supposedly has this experience, right? we're setting these goals, we're looking at these things, we're setting these vision boards, we're putting these yachts and the men and the women and the whatever it might be in our future, and we're visualizing them, we're telling ourselves affirmations and all these different things because we somehow believe that when we get those things, our experience of life will be different. That somehow that voice of insecurity, that voice of self-doubt, that voice of whatever that seems to be suboptimal as we listen to it, it doesn't feel good, will somehow go away. And I truly believe that's what people are actually signing up for. They're not signing up for the car. They're not signing up for the wedding. They're not signing up for the big house. What they're signing up for is at some point, that voice in my head just turns off. And I think every single client that I've spoken to in the past 10 years, I've made sure that they understand when we get started in this conversation, I am not going to be able to do that for you. What I will be able to do for you is for you to know that voice in such intimate detail, distinguish it in so many different colorful ways, that the moment you start to hear it again, it'll be like, you standing up at the plate and, there's a pitch high and outside. Instead of swinging at it like a flailing, just flailing at that pitch, you're just going to be like smiling, like going like, nah, I'm not taking the bait today. It's okay. As expected, that's not the kind of pitch I swing at anymore. And I think the more you can do that, the more you train yourself to see and distinguish where those things are just not in your lane and have nothing to do with you. And right, the more you can figure that out, the richer, the more resilient you can be in life because you're not just hacking away at stuff.
I love that. I do, but I do agree with you too that it's not the car, it's not the mansion, or the guy or the gal. It's the feeling. We go after feelings. We go after emotions, and it's all the quiet. Like, okay, we finally have made it. And the thing is that wherever you're right now, you've made it right now here, and then you can build upon it. It doesn't mean you have to be, complacent. You can be grateful for what you have right now, and still thirsty to like make more of an impact. That the whole idea of vision boards. I don't personally have one. I know a lot of people that do. And they all seem to have all these material possessions on them. I want to see the vision board that has like world peace, or the fact that everyone has like clean water to drink, or in the richest country in the world, like people don't go hungry. Like, why don't we manifest more of that? People talk about manifesting like this thing and that thing. It's all the material possessions that we think will complete us, but never do, because there's always going to be someone else that has a bigger boat.
That's right. That's right. No, and I think it's the consciousness of the person at that stage in development that those kinds of that vision board concept is helpful, right? It can pull
Yes.
people up and through where they are to believe in something bigger and more than themselves. But I know Jim Carrey for years has been saying, like, he's like, you think, getting $1 million is going to make you happy? I mean, there's all these famous, versions of him like saying that again and again about like, I'll tell you, you're wrong, and there's enough examples of people with success and all of that find it at the end of the day and then don't have the internal structure, the internal work done, the foundation built upon which that thing that they finally got to can be enjoyed and appreciated in the way that would bring them happiness. So much of that, I think, represents something that they think might, but it may not be in resonance with them. And I think that's how it all sorts out. But you bring up something that's at the core, and honestly, the next book that I want to really write now is, years ago, one of my mentors, Matthew Ferry, we were talking about this idea of vision boards, and it was like I think it was like in 05, 06. It was like The Secret just came out, and it was the law of attraction, and get your vision board up there, and you want to buy a red Porsche, you want a red Porsche, go to the dealership and go drive a red Porsche, and guess what? You're going to start seeing red Porsches everywhere, right? And that was like the wisdom. So visualize it, see it, touch it, be it. And I remember, he said to me, he said, nah, he's like, I prefer miracle boards. I'm like, what's a miracle board? He's like, it's a board where you declare all the unexpected good fortune in your life. And I'm like, unexpected good fortune in your life? He's like, yeah. He's like, it's like you basically go through life and you declare what has been unexpected and good that's happened to me today. And to start to declare that and start seeing and noticing and distinguishing those things that are unexpected and good that happen in spite of yourself. And that took me back to an interview I did when I was 22 years old for this book, Enterprising Women. And I got to meet this woman, Trisha Wilson, and she was a interior designer in Dallas, Texas, and very successful. And she did big hotels, the Riga, the Waldorf, all these places. And I remember I was really young. I was the ghostwriter for this book, and I walked into her office. She's like, "Who are you?" And and anyway, 2 hours later, we had this great interview and chat. And I said to Trisha, "Trisha, what's next for you?" And she just leaned over and she said to me, she's like, "Shasheen, I just don't have the creativity to answer that question." She said, "If you told me a year ago that I'd be on safari in Africa, and on that said safari, I meet the most handsome gentleman to whom I would be engaged 6 months later, I would have said, you're crazy." And then she says, "You know what? That's what happened." She said, "If I told you that I'd be sitting on a first-class seat on my way to New York at the Waldorf Astoria, and sitting next to me were two Japanese men, and my only word of Japanese that I knew was konnichiwa, with a glass of champagne in my hand at 10 a.m., mind you, I reached over and said konnichiwa, that single event opened up the doorway to our company's two biggest hotel projects in the history of our 20-year history," I would have said, "What are you smoking?" But you know what? That's what happened. And she said, you live life, it's like, we know where we're headed. You show up, you do a good job. When you mess up, you admit it. Just be kind to people. And it's like somehow the world has an interesting way of working itself out. And I remember hearing that and getting it took me years to really get the profundity of that. But I think this goes back to our original topic of like coherence, setting a good foundation. How's our inner alignment? And if we're actually living in that way, we're not slapping stuff on top of a foundation that's just got muddy water. That same mentor said to me, he's like, "You know what, Shasheen?" He's like, "The thing about you is," he's like, "you're like a rose garden with the sewer running underneath you." He's like, "It looks really pretty, man, but as you get close to you, man, you stink. You just stink." And I think that, I've spent a good part of my life getting down in that sewer and picking up all the trash, laying it out to dry and cleaning things and continually putting fresh water in that system so that the flowers smell good. You can get close these days and it doesn't stink anymore. And I think that's what it's about. And if you can live your life in that way, I think you're talking about we go into this world of living in the miraculous, like, the unexpected good fortune, the serendipity of life. And I think that's the artistry. That's the fun. That's the experience of being alive in life. I think that's what's exciting to me these days.
I love it. I think it gets down to purpose, or at least you can tie it back to purpose. And I've been in a lot of conversations, I would say, over the last 3 months. Maybe it's because of what we're going through as a planet, as a country. What's my purpose once we get through this and create the new normal, if you will? So everyone seems to be searching for their purpose. What's my purpose? I don't have a purpose. What's my purpose? Like, I got to find my purpose. No, the purpose will find you. Like the back and forth. Oh, I got a worksheet on purpose. Oh, we'll do this workshop on purpose. All that jazz. To what you just said, I think it can tie back to purpose, that our purpose, the purpose of life that we all share, is to be fully in our moment. Like this moment, and then this one, and then this one. that we're fully present for this one wild and precious life. That's life. That's what it means to live. All this other stuff, we've talked about in the past. You can't take it with you, right? But golly, do we chase it along the way? And we miss an opportunity to be like present in our lives, be fully here. So I just
Well,
love that.
and I think though, but and it sounds so, if you will, cliche, like we just have to be here and now. But if you really take on what that really means and what's required of oneself to experience that with greater frequency, there's a whole world to unpack there, right? There's a whole load of things that surface up that prevent us from that. So, I think that the artistry and the work in life is to keep, I'm certainly not present moment all the time, but boy, I'm finding myself more and more present, I'm finding not as distracted as I once was, or not needing to be distracted as I once was. I don't have to sit there and do a day of Netflix, or, I don't have to drink, that, bottle of wine at night to just numb myself, or I don't have to, whatever it is, pick your poison. But I think that at least I've lived in a very distracted state, and that discomfort of being present, sit in silence for a while. So you want to be uncomfortable, sit in silence and just listen to yourself. I mean, that's why people don't like meditation very much. It's like, God, I just can't settle my brain. It keeps going. So what do I do instead of trying to settle it? Let me just distract it. That way I don't have to pay any attention to it. So I think that, like, I love what you just said there, because, just see what stands in the way of you being actively present in your moments of your day, and see what comes up. And boy, that's a lifelong journey of work that I think that we're all, I think that's the work.
That's the work.
Yeah.
That's the work.
Yeah.
I want to end with your 5 questions.
Yeah.
Your 5 emotional mastery questions. Can you share them with us?
Yeah. And, just a little pretext for this, these questions, there's nothing really new about them, but organized in this way, I think really, if someone gets nothing else out of this other than these 5 questions, and just practice these things for 30 days, you will begin to see that which stands in the way of you being present in that moment to have an experience of life. And what the questions ask of you is to take in a situation. And again, these are questions kind of post-mortem. So something has already happened already. And now you're trying to say, like, God, I'm just not feeling great. I'm feeling out of sorts. I'm feeling out of alignment, or I'm just triggered and upset. And the 5 questions most simply are, first is asking what actually happened. What did you observe? And if you can do that and strip away all of the interpretation that typically we add automatically into anything that we see, and just simply articulate that, it's like, I walked into the house, my wife said, blah, 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 blah. I walked into the restaurant, and right, and just really, really simplify things. We can then go to the second question, distinct from that, is, well, what did I conclude? Well, I walked into my house and my wife said, blah, blah, blah. I concluded she was angry. Well, that's different, right? And so when we start getting into that second question of what did I conclude, a whole world opens up in terms of, gosh, what I conclude about kind of objective things that happen in the world are completely based on my conditioned experience in life. And that opens up a whole world of self-discovery that we can get into at another call. But then the third question then becomes, from what did I observe? What did I conclude? Well, then how did I react? What was the emotional space that got created inside of me? How did I feel, really, more than I react? How did I feel? So she was angry. I got angry. And then the fourth question is, well, what action did I take coming from that emotional state? And then the fifth question is, well, did that action move me closer to or farther from my intended outcome? And when clients hear this for the first time, a couple things happen. They first get that, like, oh God, what actually happened versus what I concluded. There are so many things that can happen in that second question. Then the third question of like my emotional state, like, wow, my emotional state actually is the reason why I acted that way. I mean, I could have acted a lot. I could have just kept my mouth shut. I could have said something nice, but no, but I was so upset. I was so triggered that, wow, I could actually have other options to act on. But if I don't get into that emotional state, well, to not get in the emotional state, you got to go back. Well, I have to conclude something different on those events. And then the next thing they realize is that, like, I didn't really have an outcome in mind. I was just going through life with an expectation of how people should and shouldn't be. And when people don't act the way I want them to, it pisses me off. I have a reaction. So rather than, really creating outcomes, we actually have expectations. So if we can shift from having expectations of the world and how things should and shouldn't be according to ourselves and start creating outcomes, well, it opens up now a doorway to other possibilities of collaboration, or maybe letting people know what it is that you want from them and that kind of thing. And meeting that independent, free-thinking person with their own set of conditions, beliefs, and values that has their expectations of how the world should be, right? Yeah. So, that's a whole nother podcast about, can we all just get along, right? So
yes, that question still remains unanswered, right? So I think the answer is yes. I have faith.
Yes.
I'm optimistic. So I love those questions, Sash. And I loved the king and the kid and the king. So
Yeah.
I keep on putting the king in front of the kid.
That's how it actually works. Eventually, you actually put the king in front of the kid, and you put the kid in the back seat and take him for the ride and give him some ice cream and some DVDs and let him take a cruise with you.
Chin up and crown on. But a great contribution. I'm psyched for you. I'm grateful that you wrote the book. There is brilliance in it that we all need at this moment in time. I do think, and I know you feel the same way, we're on the cusp of something. We either go forward and create a better tomorrow for all of us, or we revert back. And right now, I think you have, that's the battle, if you will. How are we going to go forward? Are we going to be living in our present moment, fully awake to this one wild and precious life, or are we going to continue numbing ourselves from the life that we only get one crack at? How can people reach you? What's the best way?
The easiest way is at Shasheen. So Shasheen.com is the website, and that's spelled SHASHEEN.com. And, from there you can follow social, and there's a link to the book on the website. And at Shasheen on Instagram or on Facebook or on Twitter, it's all at Shasheen. And there's nothing to sign up for. There's no courses. There's no funnel. I'm not going to ask you a whole lot of questions. If you want the book, pick it up. The audiobook should be out really shortly. And, if someone wants to engage in a conversation, send me an email, and tell me what's on your mind. And maybe beyond, hey, how are you? I loved your book. But, ask a good question, engage. And that's what the book's about, is re-engaging, reigniting, connecting. Yeah. So, that's how you can reach me, at Shasheen.
Love it, brother. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Have fun storming the castle.
I sure will. All right, my man. Be good.
Hey there, it's Michael. Well, welcome back. I hope you loved our interview with Shasheen as much as I did. He is a mensch, as they say in New York. And I encourage you to follow him, connect with him on his website or through whatever social media you wish to connect with him on, and pick up his book, The Kid and the King. Excellent read. It's beautifully done. As he mentioned, it took him years to write, but I'm so glad he did, because he came out with a masterpiece that allows you to go through your moments with more awareness, to be emotionally aware. So when you have a tough moment, you don't give that moment any more fuel than it deserves, and it turns into a bad day or even longer. So again, I hope you enjoyed the energy of Shasheen, his philosophy, his take on personal development today. And I hope you'll follow up with him, connect with him. I know he will enjoy it. As always, thanks for listening and subscribing and commenting and sharing with your friends. Until next week's conversation about resilience on the Kintsugi Podcast, remember, if you have a challenging moment or two, come back to your breath. Slow it down and know that you got this and we got you. And don't forget to have fun storming the castle. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.